Hey everybody, it's the Rev. What I'd like to do today is to continue on in our series of Matthew, but rather than to get into new territory, to briefly re-examine what we've already covered, but as a whole piece. Okay. Um, when you look at the gospel, you have to recognize that it's not broken up into little pieces and little chapters, and there's not nice little neat subtitles that tell you, this is the genealogy of Jesus, and this is the wise kings from the east. Um, it's written in one whole piece. Um, but as we look at it as one whole piece, we recognize that there's certain parts of the narrative that actually go together. Okay, and what we've covered so far could be called the first narrative section of the Gospel of Matthew, and it would be the beginnings or the birth of Jesus, the birth and origins of Jesus. And what's really important, I think, is not only to recognize the importance of the issues of Jesus' origin for the rest of the story, but to also understand that what the writer of Matthew was doing is trying to build an understanding in his reader or his listener of exactly what kind of person Jesus is, what kind of movement this Jesus movement is, and what it means to actually be a follower of this Jesus. We need to understand that the first things are always going to set up the next thing. If we don't truly understand the beginning, we don't have a platform for which to understand everything else. I hope I'm making that clear. Um, it's if I'm telling you the story of someone's life, it's imperative that I explain where they come from, what culture they're in, what were the meanings of of their existence. But in addition to that, if I'm starting a tale, I need to start a tale with what is generally called an introduction. Okay. In Jesus' case, in the Gospel of Matthew's case, the introduction is what we've been covering so far. Matthew wants to set the stage for what's to come, and he does so by explaining just exactly who Jesus is and where he came from. And there's some major themes when we look through them. The genealogies are these radical groups of steps through which we come to Jesus, where we learn first and foremost that Jesus is part of a group of people that define themselves as the sons of Abraham. Jesus is defining himself, or Matthew is defining Jesus as part of the Jewish nation. But in addition to that, he goes through extraordinary lengths to take Jesus and to connect him with King David, which is also going to be important. It's going to be extremely important because the rest of the Gospels, Jesus continually talks about what the kingdom of God is. And if the kingdom of God is a theme of the Gospel, then the understanding that Jesus is the new king. King David was the king that all the other kings were measured up against. If Jesus is the new king, then it helps us to understand this new kingdom and Jesus' right to frame the rules for this new kingdom. So through the genealogies we see that, but we also see this radical understanding that Jesus comes from a line that is not only Jews, but is also Gentiles. We see a genealogy in a patriarchal system that is not just based on men, but also based on women. We see a genealogy that does not only talk about the great men in its past, but talks about the people that were downright evil as well. That the genealogy tells us something of the universality of who Jesus is. Then we move on and we begin to realize that Matthew is trying to help us understand who Jesus is based on the story of his birth through Joseph, through the positioning of the story outside of the system of power. Jesus wasn't born in Rome, and he wasn't born in Jerusalem. Jesus was born in this tiny town of Bethlehem. He was born from a poor man named Joseph. He was born under dubious circumstances from a woman who was a virgin, so she said. But you can imagine, the people of that time would have questioned her story as well. That Jesus is the Son of God. We see this same story in the astrologers from the east that come to worship the new King of Jerusalem, when the religious leaders of the Jewish people, who know where he is, do not come and do the same thing. Where the true King of Jerusalem, the Roman regent of the town, seeks to destroy this person that would come and usurp his authority. We see this story that Matthew sets up that begins to position Jesus in the margins of society, but not just governmental society. Jesus wasn't just a governmental radical, but also in the religious society. Jesus is structured outside of it, but also culturally. Jesus is born from a woman who would have been considered a sinner. His father would have been considered a weak man who accepted a child that was not his own. They come from an area that is considered fallen and compromised. Matthew sets the scene in the margins. And then, in addition to all of these things, Matthew begins to show that the kingdom of God that is being foretold in the Old Testament, this kingdom of God that is breaking into this new world, is being radically, violently opposed by the powers that be. Now, why is this all important? It's very important because this is the beginning of the story. We have to take this and use it for a template for understanding the rest of the story, to begin to understand who Jesus was. It is important for us because we have interpreted the scriptures not from a marginalized outcast group of people like the gospel was written to, but we have been interpreting the scriptures from a position of power and privilege, which affects the way we view it. What does this mean to me? Well, it means to me that Jesus is calling us to follow him, which means leaving those places of power, leaving those places of privilege, leaving those positions that give us honor, and becoming humble like Jesus did, being around the people that were the least, standing up against injustice, and declaring that which will reach its fulfillment in the end of the age, when all is set right and God truly reigns, that all that's in the future is even now breaking into the present in the lives of people that take seriously following Jesus.